Hey class, today we're going to do a deeper dive into natural classes and distinctive features. And I want to make sure that everybody is well versed in this. This is going to be um, the majority of the content when we get to quiz 4. So we did talk about it. We're going to review some of the topics we've already talked about, but then talk about some in more detail. So let's get started. So um, During the consonant lecture, we talked about how sounds can be grouped in different ways, depending on their features. And this is important because these different groups of sounds that share these features show the same patterns of behavior. So this starts to affect the phonology of our language. And these natural classes, these occur across languages. So we know that the IPA is an international language. Obviously, in this class, we're concentrating on English, but I just want to make sure that everyone knew that this term natural classes applies across languages. So let's talk about how natural classes affect phonology. One of the way they affect it is that, um, as we said, a group of sounds that are the same in the same class will behave similarly. So we know that if vowels are before a nasal consonant, then they will be produced with nasalization, for example. We know that um, if there's a voiceless stop, such as p, t, or k, that's at the beginning of a word, it's going to be produced with aspiration versus if it was at the end of a word. So again, we see that these sounds that are classed together will always behave the same. So this is going to affect it when it's in a word. Um, we know that natural classes affect phonotactics. So phonotactics, just as a reminder, is kind of the rules that govern what sounds can be together in a syllable. So in English, we don't allow the t or the d to appear with o in the initial position of a syllable. Okay, and that's based on classes. So a continuant class and a coronal class, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Um, Another way that classes affect phonology is when we pluralize words. So, for example, voiced non-sibilants in a word will end with the voiced sound. So in the word hills, it's going to have the z sound when it's pluralized. However, voiceless non-sibilants will end with the voiceless suffix, so the s sound. So maps. Um, when we have strident consonants, then we insert a vowel before the plural suffix. So, for example, bus becomes buses, as you could see, there's a vowel inserted there. Bush has a vowel inserted before the plural. So this is how we start to recognize the patterns in our language. These natural classes help us recognize those patterns. So we can have what are considered these large binary. So binary means two, right? And you will sometimes see in different phonology books a chart, and it'll have plus or minus for these binary classes. So, for example, vowels or consonants. It's a either or, right? You can't be both a vowel and a consonant. Oral sounds versus nasal sounds are another natural class that's binary. Sounds can either be voiced or voiceless. So there's no in between for these classes. Now, other natural classes we organize based on features in a feature matrix. And we know that we've been studying the IPA, and our consonant chart is organized by classes, and those classes are place and manner, which we talked about last week. So just as a reminder, sounds are organized around these two planes, right? Around place and manner. But then we can further break this down into classes. So obstruents are a class, right? With these sound classes in it. and sonorants are another class. So these are two classes, and then within them are these individual sounds. So the way that this class is organized, this natural class, is obstruents. Airflow is restricted in the mouth. Okay, so stops, affricates, and fricatives. In the case of stops, completely constricted, but some airflow is creating that noise, for example, in fricatives. Sonorants, on the other hand, this is what we think of as having open airflow, which is why liquids and glides are considered more vowel-like. Okay, so that is how another way that we categorize these sounds. Other classes that are organized by manner are continuants and non-continuants. Again, we did talk about this in our previous lecture, so this should be a review. Continuants are sounds where we have this airflow that's, as the name would suggest, continuous. So you can sustain a sound. So fricatives, nasals, liquids, glides, and vowels. And if you make those sounds, we talked about this when we had our vowel lecture as well, you can sustain a vowel for a significant amount of time versus non-continuants where you cannot sustain the sound. So for example, stops and affricates. Another class would be stridents versus non-stridents. Stridents are what we call those noisy sounds, and basically non-stridents are all other sounds that are not stridents. So in addition to being able to organize categories of sounds into natural classes by manner, we also organize sounds into natural classes by place. So again, we did cover this in our consonants lecture, but I just want to review these terms again. So when we were talking about manner, as you know, manner is talking about that airflow and where constriction is. When we talk about place, we're talking about place of articulation. So where our articulators are, okay? So the first major natural class here is labial. So labial means our lips. So this would be any sounds that are involved with our lips. So this could be bilabial sounds. So those early developing sounds like p and b. But it can also be sounds where our lips are involved, but in this case, our teeth are also involved, right? So our labial dental sounds, so f and v. Now, coronal sounds are really sounds which are more interested in the tip of our tongue, okay? So you think of those interdental sounds like th, our tongue is, the tip of our tongue is moving between our teeth, right? Alveolar, our tongue tip as well as the blade are moving to the alveolar ridge, right? So that's our biggest group of sounds by place. And then palatal, the blade of the tongue is moving to the palatal region, okay? So coronal, think of the tip and sometimes the blade of the tongue. Dorsal is when we're using truly the back of our tongue, okay? So our velar sounds, as well as the glottal sound. Okay, so dorsal is really the most back sounds that we can produce. Okay, so those, again, this is natural classes by place of articulation. And just a reminder, when we're talking about place, we're talking about our active articulators. So our lips and our tongue, basically. And this is just, I think, a helpful chart which organizes for these different sounds what would be considered the passive articulator versus what is considered the active articulator. Okay. So why is this important? Why do we care about this besides having to pass our tests and quizzes? We care about this because this not only drives phonology, but it also drives development. So children learn their native sounds, the sounds of their native language or languages very early on through experience. So By the time they're a year old, their brains, the part of their brain that perceives speech sounds, has been narrowed to just their native sounds that they've been hearing. And this enables them to really focus on learning language. Now, it could be that they're in a multilingual environment and then their brains will be focused on multiple sounds in their multiple native languages. But we start out as kind of citizens of the world with language and can hear all different sounds, but we eventually, our brain focuses on what's important that we're hearing through experience, which is our native language. Replicated research shows that children are very good statistical learners. This is how our brains work. Our brains look for patterns, right? And children identify these patterns early on. So the sensitive period for this pattern is between 7 and 9 months when we really start seeing children be able to narrowly perceive sounds. So the sounds of our language are not operating in a vacuum, right? We learn sounds to put them together into words and to communicate. So there is a connection between phoneme development and our vocabulary development. So this is why it's important as a future speech therapist. So I had showed you a chart in the consonant lecture on sound development, and we're going to see another chart specific to English in a minute. So across languages, there was research it had been going on for quite a while, but in 2020, researchers at Charles Sturt University came out with this study, which looked at many different languages across the world. And although there are obviously unique differences, there are some sounds which often are early developing across many languages in the world. And those were plosives, so think of p, for example, and nasal sounds. So those are very early developing sounds. So we know that those, again, we're talking about natural classes, right? We know that nasals are a natural class. We know that stops are a class. So based on manner, for example. When we look at how this relates to children putting these sounds together into words, children initially take the path of least resistance. So they prefer combinations that require minimal movement. Okay, so if they have two, we say non-adjacent consonants. If there's two consonants in the word, but they're not next to each other, they will prefer to repeat the consonants by their place as well as their manner. So this is what we call reduplicated babbling. So mama, dada, nana, baba, they are repeating the same sequence of sounds. So it's the same consonants, they don't change it. When they do start to change it, they again take the path of least resistance, and the sounds that they tend to prefer is a manner change over a place change. So more likely in their babbling to produce a b and a w versus a b and a d, okay, which would be changing place of articulation. If they do have to produce two non-adjacent consonants, they will prefer that they be in the same place. So as you could see, if you were looking at our consonant chart, m and p are in the same place, okay? And m and t are not. So they're going to, again, take the path of least resistance. So they're learning these patterns and they're slowly increasing their ability to combine these words into more difficult variations. So children also, not only do they prefer not venturing too far among these classes with respect to consonants, they also prefer minimal movement between consonants and vowels. So if you were to superimpose the vowel quadrilateral onto the consonant chart, you would see that they prefer to produce labial consonants, right? So the consonants made with their lips with central vowels, not requiring a lot of movement. And I talked about this when we were talking about early sound development in one of the first few lectures. Alveolar consonants will tend to occur with front vowels, and velar consonants will tend to occur with back vowels. So why this is important is because when you are a future speech therapist, you will be picking what we call facilitative contexts. So this means that you are going to try and give the kids their best chance at producing these sound combinations. So their best chance are ones that require this minimal movement between the different articulation patterns. Okay. So I said we were going to look at sound development with respect to standard American English. So this is from Charles Sturt University, and as you could see, these very early plosive sounds, our stops are what come in earlier, our bilabial sounds. So, for example, w is a labial sound, right? Later on, we start adding other stops, right? And we start expanding. And then their latest sounds are R sound or rhotic sound, as well as the. Okay, so these come in early. We talked about this because they're visual, but they're also easier to produce. All right. So this is a helpful chart to have available. And you can go to Charles Sturt University's website and they have all types of different versions of the norms in really family-friendly handouts. Okay, so hopefully that was a little bit more information on natural classes to help you just kind of solidify the concepts. And if you have any questions, we can talk about it in our chat. Okay, bye.